Okay, let's just start with the numbers because
Uh,
they're staggering. 100 million copies sold
100 million.
and translated into what, 40 different languages?
Yeah.
When you see stats like that, your brain immediately pictures, I don't know, a religious text.
Or one of those airport thrillers, yeah.
Yeah.
The kind you see stacked up everywhere.
Exactly. The ones with girl or train in the title. You certainly don't expect those numbers to belong to a guy in a big black fedora writing about wizards and luggage with little legs.
Goblins and dwarves, yeah. It just doesn't seem to fit.
It doesn't. And that's the disconnect we really need to dig into today. We're looking at the work of Sir Terry Pratchett. And on the surface, the whole pitch it sounds a little ridiculous.
A flat world on the back of 4 elephants.
Who are standing on a giant turtle.
Swimming through space.
Right. It sounds like pure wacky escapism. And yet all the sources we looked at for this deep dive, the literary critiques, the biographies, they all argue he's one of the most profound social commentators in the last century.
There's a real dissonance there, isn't there? I mean, serious literature isn't supposed to have dragons in it.
So that's the core question, right?
Yeah.
Why is this fantasy author so universally popular and honestly so deeply respected? Is it just that people like a good joke about a wizard?
I think that's the hook, but it's not the anchor. The big takeaway we found across all the major critiques is that the turtle and the elephants, they're just a smokescreen.
A smokescreen for what?
For us. For humanity.
Yeah.
Pratchett used all those fantasy tropes as a kind of safe space. A laboratory, really.
A laboratory to do what?
To dissect how we think, how we build our societies, the stories we tell ourselves just to get through the day. If you strip away all the magic, you aren't left with nothing. You're left with a mirror.
So the Discworld, which is the setting for, what, 41 of his books?
41, yeah.
It's basically a funhouse mirror of our world.
Exactly. And sometimes that reflection is, a little too accurate for comfort. One of the best quotes we found was from a mother explaining why she gave the books to her son. She said, "These aren't like hobbits. They're the kind of people you'd meet down at the pub."
I love that. It just grounds it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But it does bring up a logistical problem for anyone new. You said 60 books?
Over 60, yeah.
So if you want to see this mirror for yourself, you're standing in front of a bookshelf and it's just intimidating.
Mm.
The logical thing to do, what you do with any other series, is you grab book number 1.
And that is the logical instinct. And in this specific case, it is the absolute biggest mistake you can make.
Okay, explain that, because start at the beginning is usually pretty solid advice.
With Pratchett, the first book is a trap.
Yep.
The first Discworld novel, The Color of Magic, it came out in 1983. And frankly, it's a bit rough.
Rough how? Is the writing just bad?
It's not bad, but it's very, very specific. It was written as a direct parody of 1970s sword and sorcery fantasy. Think Conan the Barbarian, early Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh.
So if you're not super familiar with the tropes of 70s nerd culture, a lot of the jokes they don't land. It feels more like a string of gags than a cohesive novel about the human condition.
So that human mirror thing wasn't quite there yet.
The seeds of it were. The main character, Rincewind, is this cowardly wizard who's just annoyed by how unfair the universe is. That's very relatable. But as a book,
Yeah.
it's dated. You might start there, think Pratchett is just a wacky parody guy, and then just stop.
But if you skip it, aren't you missing crucial plot points? Won't you be confused?
Not at all. Discworld isn't one long story like Harry Potter. It's a collection of standalone stories that just happen to be set in the same world. And the writing, the quality just jumps exponentially.
Really?
By the time he wrote more in 1987, that's only 4 years later, he was, and critics agree on this, he was 10 times the writer he was at the start.
10 times the writer in just 4 years. That's an incredible learning curve.
Well, he was writing 2 books a year. He was basically practicing in public. So the consensus is pretty simple. Between book 4 and, say, book 20, you can just throw a dart at the list and you'll probably hit a masterpiece.
That's actually a huge relief. It sounds like you can even tailor your starting point to what you already like.
You absolutely can. The sources we looked at suggest matching the book to the genre you usually read. So if you like Shakespeare, theater, lots of wordplay, you start with Wired Sisters. It's basically Macbeth turned inside out.
What if I'm more into something darker? Gothic horror.
Then you go for Carpe Jugulum. It's a vampire novel, but it's about vampires trying to be modern and, rebrand themselves. It completely deconstructs the Bram Stoker myth.
And for the police procedural fans, the Law and Order crap.
Then you find the Guards books, and you start with Guards. Guards. This is often cited as the absolute best entry point because it really handles that transition from fantasy parody to, like, urban realism with trolls.
Which brings us to the one book that kept coming up in all our research, the one people call his masterpiece, Night Watch.
Yes. If you ask a room of Pratchett fans, half of them are going to scream Night Watch. It was published in 2002.
And this was during what critics call his purple patch.
Right. Which, for Pratchett fans, doesn't mean overly flowery writing. It means a period from about 2000 to 2005 where he was just unstoppable, masterpiece after masterpiece, and Night Watch is the peak of that mountain.
So set the scene. It's a guards book, so it focuses on Sam Vimes.
Sam Vimes, who is arguably his greatest character, you have to know his arc. He starts out as a drunk, a total cynic found in a gutter. But over many books, he sobers up and marries into the aristocracy, becomes a duke and commander of the City Watch.
That sounds like a pretty standard rags-to-riches hero story.
It would be, except Vimes hates all of it. He hates being rich. He hates the aristocracy. He's still a street cop in his soul. And Pratchett does this brilliant trick. In the first Guards book, he introduces a character named Carrot. He's 6'6", handsome, raised by dwarves, has a magic sword, and a birthmark shaped like a crown.
Okay, so Carrot is the chosen one.
Yeah.
He's Aragorn. He's the hero.
In any other fantasy book, yes. But Pratchett brings him in and then just pushes him to the background. That whole destiny plot never really happens. Instead, the story focuses on Vimes, the angry, flawed, middle-aged guy. Pratchett is basically saying the guy with the magic sword is boring. The guy with the badge and the drinking problem, he's interesting.
So in Night Watch, Vimes is at the peak of his power. What happens?
He gets thrown back in time. It's a thriller. He's chasing a killer across a rooftop. There's a magical storm, and he wakes up in his own city, but 30 years in the past.
I have to admit, time travel can be a really cheap plot device.
Yeah.
It often feels like an excuse to just rehash old stories.
I agree. Usually it is. But here, the stakes are so visceral. Vimes arrives just days before this violent, failed revolution that he lived through as a young man. He knows exactly when the barricades go up. He knows who dies.
And he meets his younger self.
He does. But what's worse is that his old mentor, the man who taught him everything, is missing. So Vimes has to take on his mentor's identity. He has to teach his own naive younger self how to be a good cop, all while knowing that he, this mentor figure, is destined to die at the barricades in just a few days.
Wow. That's incredibly dark.
It is. It draws a lot from Les Miserables, barricades, rain, flags, but it strips away all the romance. It asks, who is a revolution really for, and what happens after the glorious fighting stops? It's a study in morality, and yet somehow it's still laugh-out-loud funny.
How does he do that? How do you write about a bloody revolution and police brutality and make it a comedy? Feels like it should be tonal whiplash.
And that gets us to the man himself. You don't write satire this layered without having a very specific kind of brain.
A sponge is how we described it in our notes.
A total trivia sponge.
Yeah.
Pratchett didn't go to university. He educated himself in the public library. He started with astronomy, which led to sci-fi, which led to mythology, then history. He just absorbed it all.
He read every single issue of Punch magazine from the 19th century.
Cover to cover. And he read London Labor and the London Poor, which is this incredibly brutal sociological study of Victorian poverty. And he'd mixed that with reading the Moomins. He made no distinction between high and low culture.
That explains why the jokes can be so hard to pin down.
It's what makes the book so accessible. You might be reading a scene and you're laughing at a reference to the movie Alien. I'm reading the same page and I'm laughing at a footnote about quantum physics. Neither of us knows the other joke is even there. The only person who gets every single joke is Terry Pratchett.
And that collision of ideas is how the Discworld itself was born.
Absolutely. It was a mashup. He was reading Larry Niven's Ringworld, which is hard sci-fi, and thought, what if it was a disc? Then he remembered the Hindu myth of the world turtle, so he just smashed sci-fi and ancient mythology together.
Creating a stage where he could talk about literally anything.
Anything. Religion, war, gender, economics, you name it.
Okay, let's drill down into two of those. Religion and gender. The sources point to small gods and monstrous regiment. Let's start with small gods.
It's a standalone book, so you can jump right in. And it's widely considered his big statement on belief.
Is it anti-religious? Because usually when a satirist tackles religion, they're going for the jugular.
It's more nuanced. Pratchett was an atheist or a humanist, but he wasn't aggressive about it. He'd donate to his local church roof fund because he valued community. Small Gods doesn't attack faith. It attacks dogma. It attacks institutions that use fear to control people.
And the premise is brilliant. The great god almost all-powerful smiting deity decides to manifest on Earth. But he ends up as a tortoise.
A tiny one-eyed tortoise. Because on the Discworld, gods run on belief, like a battery. If people stop believing, you lose power. And Ohm realizes that while his church is huge, temples, inquisitors, armies, nobody actually believes in him anymore. They believe in the institution. They fear the inquisitors. So he shrinks.
I have to share the anecdote about how he came up with the tortoise. It's too perfect.
Yeah, oh, the ego logic. Go for it.
So Pratchett was reading about the Greek playwright Aeschylus, who was supposedly killed when an eagle dropped a tortoise on his head. And Pratchett thought, that's just too much of a coincidence.
An eagle dropping a tortoise on one specific guy.
Yeah, exactly. So he reasoned the tortoise must have been controlling the eagle. But why would a tortoise want to kill a writer? And his conclusion was, nobody hates poets and priests more than God. Therefore, the tortoise was God.
And that is the quintessential Pratchett leap of logic. It's hilarious, but the book uses that comedy to ask this really profound question. Does the institution serve the belief, or does it end up strangling it?
Okay, now moving to Monstrous Regiment. This one tackles war and gender.
Published in 2003. Another standalone. It's set in this small, fundamentalist country that's losing a war against pretty much everyone. A girl named Polly disguises herself as a boy to join the army and find her missing brother.
It's a classic trope. Mulan, Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. We've seen it before.
We have. But here's the twist. Polly slowly starts to realize that the rest of her squad are also women in disguise.
All of them.
Pretty much all of them. And here's where the deep dive gets really interesting. When Pratchett pitched this idea, his editor actually pushed back. Said it wasn't realistic, that a woman couldn't fool a whole squad of soldiers.
And Pratchett, being Pratchett, went to the archives.
He did. He went to lesbian bookshops, dug into military history, and found records of this happening all the time. The Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil War, women fighting as men, and no one knew until they were killed or wounded.
So he proved his fantasy was actually history.
He did. And the book ends up exploring gender identity in a way that was years ahead of its time. It's all about the idea that the person you are is not the person you're told you are. It's about breaking out of those boxes.
Speaking of breaking out of boxes, we should touch on the books outside the Discworld, specifically Nation.
Nation is. It's special. A lot of critics think it's his best novel, period. But the story behind it is just heartbreaking.
This was around 2004.
Yeah. He started writing it, and then two things happened. The massive Boxing Day tsunami hit the Indian Ocean, and Terry Pratchett was diagnosed with a rare, early-onset form of Alzheimer's.
That is just a devastating combination of events.
So he cleared his schedule. He put the funny Discworld books on hold because he said he had to finish Nation. He didn't know how much time he had left.
And you can feel that urgency in the book.
Oh, it vibrates with it. It's set in an alternate history. A tsunami wipes out an entire island culture, leaving only one boy, Mao, alive. He's then joined by a shipwrecked English girl, and it deals with pure rage. Mao stands on the beach and just screams at the gods, "Why did you let this happen? Where were you?"
It sounds much heavier than his other stuff.
It is, but it's also incredibly beautiful. It's about how you rebuild a world when everything is gone. If you want to see Pratchett the philosopher without the wizards, you read Nation.
On the other end of that tone, you have the Bromeliad trilogy. Truckers, Diggers, Wings. These are children's books, right?
Technically. But Pratchett always said the only difference was that the children's books were shorter. The themes are just as big.
What's the setup?
It's about gnomes, tiny people living under the floorboards of a huge department store. And they've been there so long, they've built a religion around it. They think the store is the entire universe. Signs like stationery and haberdashery are their scripture. Everything under one roof is their gospel.
That's a fantastic allegory for a closed mindset.
And it gets even better. He introduces this metaphor of the frog and the flower.
Walk us through that one.
So there are these plants, bromeliads, in rainforests. They catch water in their petals and they form these little pools. And tiny frogs are born there, live their whole lives there, and die there, never knowing that just outside the flower there is a massive rainforest.
The gnomes are the frogs.
And so are we. That's the whole point. Pratchett is saying we all live in our own little flower. We wrap ourselves in our social norms, our political bubbles, and they act like petals, blocking our view of the forest. The whole story is about the terror and wonder of climbing over the edge to see what's really there.
That feels like the mission of his entire career. Just curiosity.
Curiosity as a moral imperative. Absolutely.
We're getting to the end here, but we can't ignore the legacy. Pratchett passed away in 2015, But the story didn't quite end. We have to talk about the steamroller.
The steamroller, yes. This is a true story. He left very strict instructions in his will that his hard drive, with all his unfinished work, was to be taken out and crushed by a steamroller.
And they actually did it.
They absolutely did. With a vintage steamroller, no less. He didn't want his work pillaged, you know. He saw what happened to other authors, where half-finished drafts get released as new novels. He wanted his legacy to be the finished work.
I have so much respect for that.
Yeah.
But there was a discovery that escaped the steamroller, wasn't there?
A real literary detective story. Fans were digging through the archives of a local newspaper where Pratchett worked as a young journalist, and they found a story called The Blackberry Thing by a Patrick Kearns.
Who's Patrick Kearns?
Well, Kearns was his mother's maiden name. And Patrick sounds a bit like Pratchett. They realized he'd been writing short stories under a pseudonym for extra cash. They ended up unearthing 20 lost stories from the 70s and 80s.
That's incredible. A secret stash that survived because he probably forgot all about them.
Exactly. And reading them is like seeing the DNA of the Discworld being formed.
And there is one authorized continuation for fans of his Tiffany Aching books.
Yes. Tiffany Aching's Guide to Being a Witch. It's written by his daughter, Rihanna Pratchett, and she is the only person authorized to write for the IP.
That feels very fitting.
It really does. Pratchett admitted he struggled to write young women early on, but he learned by watching his daughter grow up. It led to these amazing, authentic characters like Tiffany. Having Rihanna write the guide feels like it closes the circle.
So if we zoom all the way back out, we started by asking why this flat world is so popular.
And I think the answer is that his career mirrors his life. He started with the funny, wacky stories like The Color of Magic. But as he grew, as he learned more, the books became more profound. He started tackling social justice, belief, war, humanism.
He tricked us. He used a fantasy world to trick us into reading philosophy.
He made us laugh so that when he punched us in the gut with a hard truth, our defenses were already down.
I want to leave you with that image from the Bromeliad. We're all frogs in a flower. Pratchett's entire life's work was an attempt to get us to just peek over the edge of the petals. So the challenge for you after this deep dive is this. What department store walls have you built around your own worldview? What stories are you telling yourself that are keeping you from seeing the rest of the forest?
That is the question.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.